Jazakallah khair. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillah wa salatu wassalamu ala rasulillah amma ba'd. So inshallah tonight, this is not going to be a lecture. It's not going to be, like a preaching session. Rather, it's going to be maybe a number of tips. And a lot of these tips I have gathered, throughout the years from my own experience. So a lot of it, inshallah, should be practical. And, some of it might be based on some reading I have done, but a lot of it, or the majority of it, is based on my own personal experience. So I hope it's going to be beneficial and useful to all of you. So I'm going to also enumerate those tips so it's easy to maybe write down if you want to write it down, or also it's easy to memorize or to like keep a mental note of it if you don't have any notebook. So, and it's not going to be in any particular order, so it might be a bit sporadic, but inshallah we'll try and make a sense of the whole or the totality of it. So there is an outline, inshallah, that I will follow, as you're going to see. So I'll start with the first tip. And this is maybe the only tip where I will mention a verse from the Quran, and I'll establish some evidence or some proof from our religion. But the rest of it, like I said, is going to be very, very practical tips. Okay, so the first one I'm going to say, and that's something that is not visible, and you may not see a direct correlation or causation, if you will, but we know it is true from our religion. And that is the fact that the parents, the father and the mother, should have taqwa, should have this quality of God-fearing. And that will impact the kids. Now, as I said, this is not something that you necessarily can prove, right? There's no necessarily any causation that you can prove other than the fact that it is in our religion and our, in the Quran, and in fact the tradition of our ummah. And in the Quran, there are basically few verses that hint to this, not necessarily something very, very explicit, but definitely something that hints to this fact. I think one of the primary examples is what you see in Surah Al-Kahf. If you read Surah Al-Kahf, like especially on Friday, you come across the story of Musa alayhi salam. Now, if you remember, the third encounter was between Musa, Al-Khidr, and that village that they came across. Now, if you notice in that encounter, there was a wall that was about to collapse, and Musa wanted to, Al-Khidr wanted to fix it up. And Musa got upset because the village was not very welcoming. So why should we do them a favor if they did not do us a favor? Now, if you remember, the answer of Al-Khidr was, and I just want to mention those two words because they are the key here. Al-Khidr said to Musa, وَكَانَ أَبُوهُمَا صَالِحًا. Like the reason these orphans will get the benefit, will get, the reward of keeping the treasure hidden so they can benefit from it when they're adults. The only reason this happened to them is because their father was a pious man. Now remember, the father has long gone, has passed away, right? So there's no direct impact, no direct causation, if you will, right? The father has long gone, has passed away, but the only thing is he was righteous, he was pious. And because of his piety, because of his righteousness, his kids were saved, or the wealth or the treasure for his kids were saved. So you can see here the kids benefited from the righteousness of the father. And I want us to keep this in mind because a lot of people may not see that connection, and it's really key. You might wonder, like, why my kids are not so obedient? But you have maybe to re-examine yourself and maybe you have to work on yourself, maybe increase your piety and increase your God-fearing quality. So don't say, well, I can go ahead and sin, and I'm sinning in private, no one knows about it. Well, yeah, Allah, of course Allah knows about it, but it will also indirectly impact the quality of your kids. So that keep that in mind. It is important. In fact, we have several stories from our tradition to basically highlight this fact. We know, for example, the mother of Imam al-Bukhari was so righteous. And Imam Bukhari, when he was a kid, he basically went blind for a while. He was blind for a while. And it was because of the sincerity and the weeping of his mother and the dua, the excessive dua of his mother, that he regained his eyesight. So this is documented in the books of tradition, right? Likewise, Abdullah ibn al-Mubarak, his father was well known for his piety. He was, he was a humble man. He was not well-to-do. He was a guard of a garden. He would never eat something that does not belong to him, even if if he got an indirect permission from the owner of the field or the garden. He was very cautious about not consuming something that is not his, and that turned out in the qualities that his son had, right? So his son was well known. Abdullah Mubarak was a well-known scholar, muhaddith. He was righteous, he was generous, he had every quality of good. And a lot of scholars trace it back to his father and how righteous his father was. So keep that in mind. So again, this is the only quality that I will, expand upon. But it's really important. The reason I spend more time on it is because it's not easily detectable. It's not something visible. It's something we believe in. But that's what makes us stand out, right? As when we say that we believe, when we say that we have faith, well, that's how you translate faith. It is something you don't see, something you may not be able to prove, but something that you will see the effect of on the long term. So it's not going to be something that you see tomorrow necessarily. If you're still young, if you're not married, it's something you want to work on right now so that you have righteous kids in the future. So inshallah, keep that in mind. So I hope you keep track of numbers. So number 2 is role modeling. Now this is really important. And this is actually opposite to the first one. This is actually a very visible and practical step. You cannot, and this is true for anything, not just religious acts. You cannot demand from your kid, for example, to not smoke while you're smoking all the time. So you have to be a role model, a good role model. You cannot be asking your kid to pray on time, but you don't pray on time, or you don't pray at all, or you pray sporadically. And you have this high expectation from your children to be praying, right? For example, you cannot expect your kids to be reading the Quran all the time, and you never open a copy of the Quran. So this is really important that you are a role model, especially when the kids are very young. Because when they're very young, they mostly rely on what they see, right? They're observing everything. They're very observant. The kids are very observant. You may not realize it. You have no idea how much they're absorbing what they see around them, especially their parents, all right? So this is why you have to be very careful what you do in front of them. So the first one about taqwa is what you do away from them, even before they were born. The second point is about what you do in front of them. That's the difference between the 2 points. So you have to be very careful, extremely careful, what you do in front of them, what you say in front of them. For example, if they observe you telling lies, right, lying, you can preach all you want. You can tell them lying is haram. You can give them lecture after lecture how haram lying is, but they've observed you telling lies. They've observed you say that, hey, tell them that dad is not home, while they see you home, right? So now you've given an image of yourself that is opposite to what you preach. So role modeling is really important to, as we say, walk the talk. You say something, you have to follow through. And you are the first person, as a mother, as a father, you're the first human being they will learn from. They will learn from you before they learn from the teacher, from the friend. They will learn from you first. Okay, so this is also really critical. Tip number 3 is about starting early. Now, I cannot remember how many times, I cannot mention how many times I have seen parents, and this is not to put down anyone or to criticize anyone, but at least for the people who still have time, you have to start early. I cannot, like I said, I cannot count how many times parents come to me and their kids are, teenagers. They're maybe 15 years old, 16, 17 years old, and they start talking about the problems they're having with their kids. Like, my son doesn't pray, my daughter doesn't, wear hijab, doesn't want to, wear hijab, or my son doesn't want to be a Muslim anymore, or something like that. I mean, I've seen many, many cases. And the first thing that comes to mind is, well, he's 15, 16, you've waited too long. You should have been raising the flag, when they were 5 or 10. Yeah, and it's not that they're gonna tell you this when they're 5 or 10, but you should have started that process a long, long time ago. So starting early is the name of the game. And we're gonna, inshallah, talk about the next tips. Are gonna also give you some idea of what you can do when they're early, because you might say, when they're young, what can I do? I mean, I cannot sit them down and give them a lecture about Islam. Believe me, I'm maybe, and I would say I am against giving lectures in general, like especially to kids. So I'm not talking about lectures, but I'll tell you what I'm talking about. And that's tip number 4. So tip number 4 is the importance of play. Yes, and unfortunately, I see it among some Muslims, especially the religious ones. They think that play, especially playing with children, is not Islamic somehow, or is not the Sunnah, or it's against the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. And that's totally false. It's totally untrue. In fact, we have several hadith from the Prophet ﷺ joking with young people or young kids. All right. Even in psychology now, we know very well that play, especially with like your own kids, occupies a very, very important position or status in the development of the child. And they especially talk about rough and tumble play. And some people might say, well, rough and tumble, it's a bit violent maybe, or maybe it's not appropriate. Totally untrue. Rough and tumble is extremely important, especially with the father, the dad. And what happens when you do that, you may not realize it, but you're teaching the kids how to behave. You're teaching them the rules of the game, because life, I mean, whether it is a job or family, it's really, in a way, it's a game. And any game you play without rules, people will not participate. They do not want to participate with you. They do not want to play with you if you're not willing to follow the rules of the game. So that's really what you're teaching them. So do not belittle this rough and tumble with a 5-year-old or 7-year-old. It's really, really important. Even before that, even when they're 3. And essentially what you're teaching them is to learn about boundaries, right? Because what's going to happen, they're going to try and push you, right? Kids love to like examine, and they try and start pushing your, different parts of your body. So they push you around a little bit, right? But what they're doing, they're studying you. They're studying how you react, right? And you're going to teach them, because they can push you, maybe they can maybe push you on your leg or your arm, and that's okay. That's, that's something you can tolerate. But what if they start pushing on your eyes? Like they want to poke you in the eye. Now you're going to tell them, no, this is a limit. Now you crossed a limit. That is so important for the kids to learn about limits when they're very young. And this is a really nice way to teach them about limits. And I tell you, I've seen kids, and you can tell right away, they've not been taught any limits whatsoever. So they come now to strangers and they start, hopping around. right? And they jump everywhere. And they come to you. You've never seen them before. And they start poking your eyes. Now you can tell these kids were never taught any limits. To come to a stranger and start, pushing on their eyes, or they put, their finger in your mouth or something like that. You can tell right there and then that these people, these kids have not been taught any rules. And you can understand, you could see how difficult it's going to be for these kids to make any friends in the future, to be acceptable socially. So that's very detrimental to your own kids. You're not doing them any favor by being super nice and pampering them and spoiling them and never teaching them any rules. So see how important it is to play. Play is not about, just having a good time. Having a good time is fine, but it's also about teaching them some rules. Same is going to happen to them when they go and play in school. If they're not willing to follow any rules, no one wants to play with them. They're going to be, set aside. They're going to be casted away, and no child wants to play with them. And it's going to be extremely hard for them to make friends. So that's super important. And that is tip number 3. I'm sorry, tip number 4. Tip number 5 is about the importance of spending quality time with them, and especially I would say story time and bedtime story. And this is something well known in this society. Maybe not as common in maybe Muslim countries, especially, and this is a good habit we should adopt. Now, what I've done personally in the past when my kids were very young, what I've done was, it does not have to be a story necessarily. Like, of course, you can tell them about the stories of the prophets. That's a great time to tell a story like that, right around bedtime, because they're settled down a little bit. They're not, hopping around and so energetic. So it's much easier to have them focus on something, right? But what I've done also is, in some cases, I would do some open session where they can ask me anything they want. And I did that when they were a little older. So now they're 10, they're 12. At that time, they are so curious. And I'm telling you, we have to satisfy this curiosity. And that's one of the greatest resources we have, among kids, the fact that they want to learn. So what happens, we shun them away when they want to learn, when they're open-minded and they want to listen to us and they have all kinds of questions. We tell them, hush. We tell them, be silent. We tell them, go to sleep. And then when they're 15 and 16 and 17, we wonder why they don't speak to us anymore. And when we try and engage them, they don't want to talk. They don't want to talk to us anymore. So it's really important when they're in that age of curiosity. They're 9, they're 10, they're 11. They have all kinds of questions, especially about religion, especially about God, and about, the messengers, and about history, what happened in the past, about the future, about, hellfire and Jannah, paradise. This is the best time to take care of that. And one thing I realize is that you have to learn yourself. You have to know your religion yourself. You have to learn it yourself before you can teach it to your kids. So if you think that you're behind a little bit, that you're not very well learned about a particular topic in Islam, now is the time, and it's a good cause. It's a good reason to learn about theology a little bit, to learn about aqidah a little bit, to learn about the stories of the Prophet. Even if you heard it in the past, brush up on it. Learn, read on it, and be ready for those questions. So what I used to do right before sleep, I would tell my daughters, for example, you can ask me any question you want about Islam, and nothing is off the table. And wallahi, I used to have a great time. Sometimes if I don't know the answer, I would tell them, I'll tell you tomorrow. I will go and search it up and, do research, or maybe call a sheikh or my teachers, my shuyukh, and learn about it, and then come back the next day. And now they're ready to hear the answer. So it was really, very productive. But this is definitely something you want to tap into and utilize. Number 6 is about and this is a general tip, it's not something specific, it is about managing expectations. What I've seen among Muslim parents, I've seen basically two types, two categories. We have the parents who have such a high expectation from their kids. You want your kids to memorize the entire Quran. You want them to become scholars. You want them to learn Arabic. You want them to learn Arabic grammar and tajweed and nahu and all of that. And you want them to excel in school. You want them to be the grade A students and all of that. Such a high expectation, and you cannot believe how much stress it will put on your kids. Tremendous amount of stress. And I've seen the other type of parents who have such a low expectation. Sometimes no expectation whatsoever. And I'm telling you, neither is good. We have to be moderate and we have to manage those expectations. All right. So that's really crucial also in raising kids, that you should not, you should be fair. You should not have such high expectations that you don't ever dream to have, for example, and you never even tried to have. And I'm not saying that you should not raise the bar. All of us would like our kids to be better than us. I've always wanted that for my kids, that they always be better than me, that they always exceed me in every possible way. And they would excel beyond what I have been able to accomplish in my life. So no doubt that's every parent's wish, but we also have to be reasonable. So this is also something really important, that we're able to manage expectations. Number 7 is about being specific in our instructions. Okay, so I find a lot of parents, what they do, they want their kids to do something, right? But they're very, very generic or vague in what they ask from the kids. And we kind of think, and I don't know why, but we think that the kids will be able to understand anything we want from them. We think that they're thinking at our level. Like you're 30, 40, or 50 years old, you should not expect the 10-year-old or the 15-year-old to be operating at the same level as you are. No way. So we have to water it down. We have to break it down to pieces. And that's actually very well known in the literature of psychology and psychiatry and all of that, that you have to be very specific, especially for young kids. You have to be very specific in your instructions. And let me give you an example. You could come to your kid and say, hey, you better clean up your room. Your room is a mess. And believe me, that kid is clueless. They have no idea what to do because you've not given them any specific instructions. And you come the next day and you keep repeating and you get angry and upset. Hey, don't you understand? I told you yesterday that you should clean up your room. And you think the kid is just lazy or disobedient, or they don't want to, listen to you, and on and on. Sorry, yes, inshallah, I will summarize it for you at the end, so you don't keep waiting. So yes, I'll summarize. I have like 10 or 11 points. I hope you're taking notes, but I will also summarize at the end, inshallah. So we have to be specific in our instructions, especially when you're trying to grow discipline among your kids. And discipline has to start really early on. And you won't believe how good it's gonna be. How much benefit you are giving to your kid, how much you're benefiting your kid when you teach them discipline at an early stage, because it's going to stay with them the rest of their lives, right? So for example, you come to the room, you don't tell them, just clean the room. You tell them, hey, you see this toy on the floor. Please pick it up and put it on this shelf. Now you can do it once, twice. Now they know exactly what you mean. And then you come and say, hey, look at this bed. Can you please make up the bed? You're not sleeping anymore. Go ahead and make it up. All right. And then you come and say, see these the clothing you have on the floor. Can you please fold it and put it in the drawer? So now in the kid's mind, he has an idea of what cleaning the room is, what cleaning the room is, right? So now they know it's made of 1, 2, 3, and 4, like 4 steps. So every time you come and tell them, and after some training, Every time you come and tell them, clean the room, now they have in mind, oh, I have to go and pick up all the toys, right? I have to make up the bed. I have to fold the clothes I have to put them in the drawer. So now they have an idea what to do. And you can do that for many, many different things that you want them to do. But you have to be very, very specific, especially when they're very young. And inshallah, if they pick up these habits, it becomes much easier for them, because I'm telling you, it's so hard to come to a teenager, 15, 16, 17 years old, and tell them to be disciplined, or tell them to be orderly, or tell them to be clean. And you all know what I'm talking about if you have teenagers, right? This, you know, never ending challenge of telling them to clean a messy room. So if you bring that discipline when they're young, it's going to be, inshallah, very effective. All right. So number 8, and this is also something I have tried myself. And this is going to be, you know, raising kids is a battle. We have to face it, right? And this battle is always about how much pain and how much gain. It's a balance between the two. So for example, you might see some parents who are always after the painful part. Like, you have to study, you have to do your homework, and you can never play anything. You can never play any game. You're not supposed to, you know, log in to this or that. And there are a lot of meticulous instructions, right? On one hand. And the other hand, you have some parents who are totally okay with their kids playing games non-end. It could be, you know, hours and hours of sitting in front of Xbox, or there are, now we have, you know, the phones, which is readily accessible and available to everybody, every kid. What you want to do is introduce a nice balance. And I cannot tell you exactly, like, for example, at one time in my kids, you know, growth, I found that about maybe half hour of study with maybe 15 hour of play, if I remember correctly, because it was a while back. For me, at least, it was working well. I found that this was the right formula. But I think this is what you want to experiment with a little bit. But the name of the game is that you want to make sure you have a balance between the two. Now, I think the pain, and that's my personal opinion, I think the pain should be slightly more than the gain, because it's always a reward at the end. I mean, and this is totally true in psychology, even for grown-ups, right? You don't want to be working nonstop for 8 hours. They always tell you, reward yourself at the end of a busy session of work. Maybe you had 2 hours of meetings. You should have a break. You should take a break. Now that reward could be a cup of coffee for you as an adult. It could be that you may have a walk outside and, you know, have some you know, a breath of fresh air. It could be any of those things, right? For the kid, it could be something else. You can give him, I don't know, an ice cream. You probably can give him, you can let him play on his favorite, you know, game or a toy. You know, those things you have to determine for yourself. But the formula and, you know, the fact that you need to have both is, you know, is global, is universal. You cannot just focus on pain with no gain, or you cannot just focus on serious work and no reward and no play. So you have to have both. But it's up to you how you want to manage and how you want to, you know, keep that in a moderate way. So it's not excessive on either end. Okay. So this is the no pain, no gain rule. That's what we called it. And this is a well-known, you know, principle, right? But I thought it was very, very helpful and productive in our kids' life. Tip number 9 is becoming friends with your children. And that usually happens when they become teenagers, right? That is super important. Now, if you've been doing what I said and more, and it's not just what I say, but if you've been paying attention to raising your kids and putting a lot of energy and a lot of priority to that, because you gotta give it priority. Now you're gonna realize that when it comes to this very critical time of, say, from 13 till 19, Now you're going to have to change the game a little bit. And this is where I introduced few things like becoming a friend, trying to establish as much communication as possible. So one thing I tried, which I thought worked really well, and that is to establish office hours for my kids. So anytime they came to me and said, hey, Dad, I want to talk to you about something, I would say, okay, why don't you book some time with me? I'm serious. And they would, and that way, what happens, like, you know, he or she would come to my office or my room, and we would close the door. So there's no interruption. There's no distraction. I don't want any other kid, I don't want their siblings to listen to that conversation. I want to make sure that if they want to talk to me about something private, that they have, they had the freedom to do that. So this assured that they have their time. Their time was well kept. Their time was, uh, you know, preserved for them, and there was no distraction. And they really enjoyed it. Now they felt that they're important, that I have my own personal time with dad or with mom, right? And I can say anything I want. I have the privacy. So I'm not being distracted. My siblings are not making fun of me because something I did, maybe something dumb I did. Now I can say anything I want, and I have the privacy. Okay, so this was something that really worked for us, and I definitely recommend it, for whoever is interested. But essentially, the idea is you wanna understand that every kid is different. And what I realized after having these private sessions is that every kid has different priorities, have different interests. So we ended up having totally different conversations. Like from the youngest, daughter to the oldest son, everybody had a different personality. We had a different type of conversation, different interests. And this is when I learned about my kids far more than I ever anticipated. Because, when you're sitting down together at dinner, you're not going to see those sides of your kids. It's only when you are sitting alone, now their private side or their real personality comes out. So you want to leverage that. You want to make sure you provide that. Now it doesn't have to be office hours like what I did, but make sure that you set up some private time, some personal time, and address their very specific questions or needs, or it could be just any kind of conversation they want to have with you. So that was tip number 9. And that is also very crucial in my opinion. Tip number 10 is about being flexible in general. Now, I say that because, and that kind of relates to expectations, what I mentioned earlier, but I want to be very specific, and I want to be very clear also. I've seen parents who have been very strict with their kids. For example, they insist that their kids have to memorize the entirety of the Quran. Okay? Now, alhamdulillah, I'm not against that. I'm all for it. Alhamdulillah, I have 2 kids who have memorized the Quran. But I'm going to tell you that I was not forcing them. I don't remember ever forcing them to memorize Quran. And I'll tell you something too. So yes, it is true when they were young, we always had these circles. So we sit down together and just recite together in unison. Or I would recite and they would recite after me. So that's what we did at home when they were very, very young. Also, we also were enrolled in whatever program we can find in the masjid. And also there, I was very picky. So for example, if I noticed the kids did not like a particular sheikh, we would leave and go to a different masjid. And this was before we came here, by the way, before we came to Arizona. So don't start thinking about which masjid. Even before we came here, we were very picky. So if they did not click with the sheikh, if they don't click with the teacher, you may want to reconsider. Maybe there's no chemistry. So you have to look for a different teacher. But be flexible. But I want to say that memorization is not for every kid. Some kids are made to memorize. They're created to memorize. They're so good in memorization. And some other kids are not. So be flexible. Of course, you should try and you should plant the seed. That's what is important. And that's what you do when they're very young. So you sit with them, you recite with them, you make it enjoyable. But later, if you're trying and trying and they're not responding and they're not able, like they try and they're not able to memorize, just go easy on them. So for example, what happened to me, I realized at one point that they're not, alhamdulillah, we tried different masajid, we tried different teachers, and they made some progress, but then there's a lull. There's a period of, no uh, productivity, let's say, no activity. That's fine, because those things will happen, those periods will happen. And then later, what I found was because you planted the right seed, even when they were like 15 or 16, they came back by themselves and they finished memorizing the Quran without any push from me. So I did not have to do the last push. They did it on their own. And this is like the best thing that can happen, that they do it on their own and they were totally convinced that this is good, that this is something they want to do. All right. Like I said, I mean, it's all about balance. You have to, in the beginning, you have to make these pushes, but they have to be very gentle. And of course, you have to encourage, you have to, incite a little bit, maybe reward sometimes, but you have to be flexible. And no one will understand your kids like you do. So, and that's the name of the game. Again, I cannot tell you exactly how it is done because it's different from one parent to another. All I can say is be flexible, be ready to change your way, be ready to change your approach. Okay. The last tip I want to say, and this is maybe not a tip even, it's more like, well, how do I tell that I was successful? In all these years, I've been trying and trying, but how do I tell that I'm successful? And obviously, there are many different ways. And I'm telling you, no matter how much you try, you're not going to have this idealistic kid. Like some people are so perfectionist in their lives and they expect a perfect kid. And I tell you right now, if you don't know already, but I think you should if you've been a parent for a while, there's no such a thing. Those kids don't exist. There's no such a thing as a perfect kid. Even if your perception of someone else's kid, because all you could see is the good side. Even if your perception is that they have a good kid or a perfect kid and I don't, it's not true. There's no such a thing. Now, of course, there are good kids and there are bad kids. I'm not denying that, of course. And there are obedient kids and not so obedient kids. I'm just saying, do not be a perfectionist. Allow for error. You have to have some room for error. And if you don't do that, you're going to live a miserable life. And you're going to have a miserable relationship with your kids because the expectations are too high. So then the tip number 11, what I want to say is just one way to tell if you've done a good job. And that's again my way of determining. It doesn't have to be your way, but I would like to recommend it anyways. And what I'm talking about is, so let's say now they are a bit grown up. They could still be, in their teenage years, but maybe they're in their 20s, early 20s, maybe in the later 20s, or maybe the rest of their lives. The one thing that can tell you if you did a good job is, are you able to sit down with your kids and have a decent conversation? And I don't want you to minimize or trivialize that, concept. The fact that you're able to sit down and have, and I'm not talking about a conversation such as, how are you? I'm doing fine, and that's it. Or alhamdulillah, I had a good day in school. That's not a conversation. Okay? I'm not talking about that. Or, how was your day? Or what kind of grade did you get on math? This is not a conversation. Believe it or not, a lot of times this is the kind of conversation that goes on in the house. So tip number 11 is maybe a way to test the waters, to see how well you're doing, how good you're doing. Are you able to have a decent conversation, a conversation that can last, 10, 15, 30 minutes with one of your kids? And can it be about any topic of your choosing? Can you have a conversation with your children about politics, about religion, about coffee? I don't care, but like where you explore things and you give different takes on things. You provide a different angle and they provide, and you allow for difference of opinion and you respect, you know, their opinion, even if it is opposite to yours. I think that is so crucial, especially now in this time and age. Especially when you know that your kid's going to go to college and they're going to have all kinds of conversations. So imagine if you are deprived from all these conversations. Can you imagine how little you know about your kids and what they think about and their opinions? Imagine that they're willing to share all of this knowledge, all of these ideas that are brewing in their minds. They're willing to share those ideas with their college mates, with their teachers, with their friends, but they're not willing to share it with you. And you have no idea, you have no clue what they're thinking about. Imagine that for a minute. Would you accept that? And imagine the opposite. If you're able to have any kind of conversation, and those conversations are deep, they're not shallow. They're not just about, what kind of grade did you have on this particular subject? And that's it. Or what is your future like? Or you're having you're not going to have a good future because you did not select a particular program or a particular, degree or particular major. But you're able to sit down and have a long, deep conversation about an interesting matter. What's going on in this time and age? What's going on with racism in this country? What's going on with the coronavirus? What's going on with the political scene, the polarization we have between right and left? Any topic of your choosing. It could be an interesting topic about religion, right? About Islam. All right. So I think this is one of the litmus tests, and it can tell whether you did a good job establishing this channel of communication, right? And like I said, this has to start early, and it could manifest itself in different ways at different times, at different ages. And one time it could have been a story you told. Another time it could have been that you were able to listen to your kids and not pretend that you're listening, but you're really listening. At another time, it could have been those office hours you've had with your kids. All of that will accumulate, right? And will manifest, at the end will manifest in a very nice conversation, very deep conversation that you really appreciate and you value over, listen to this, you value over sitting with your friends and playing whatever cards or sipping tea and talking about overseas. So I'll end with that, inshallah. And I'll give you, a quick summary for those who came late, and inshallah, then we'll open it for questions. I'm really eager to hear your comments and questions. And I apologize if I went over. I don't know. I was not keeping time, so I hope I was not too much over.
You are on
Looks
time.
like 45 minutes maybe, but I think we did not. I don't know if we started on time. So hopefully I did not go over too much. So if you allow me, Brother Naqib, just to
Yeah, you
summarize
are on
quickly.
time, brother. Go ahead. You are on time. No issue.
Okay, perfect. So without any elaboration, the 11 points I mentioned, one is taqwa. Number two is role modeling. Number three is starting early. Number four is the importance of play, especially rough and tumble play. Number five is story time and bedtime. Number six is managing expectations. So to make sure not too high and it's not too low, it's rather somewhere in the middle. Number seven is being specific in the instructions you give to very young kids. Number eight is this moderation between, or this balance between pain and gain, but you got to have both. Number nine is being friends with them and having something like office hours where you allow for private conversations. Number 10 is being flexible in your approach and not having too high an expectation, and also about being flexible in general. Like if one thing doesn't work, be ready to move on and try another approach. So that is number 10. And number 11, and that's more like a test of your success. Are you able to have a long and profound conversation with your children? So inshallah, I'll stop here and listen to your comments and questions.
Jazakumullah khairan, Sheikh Anas. Wonderful tips. I should not say lecture. And as you said, you don't like lecture also. So it's a very wonderful and very effective tips how to raise the kids, especially in this world. So brothers and sisters, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask your question to Sheikh Anas. We still have 5 to 10 minutes left for question and answers. Or you may text your question to Sheikh Anas as well.
Sheikh Anas, Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
So nowadays the social media is a like pandemic, right? So you have any tips for
I like you
exposure to
say
social media?
pandemic. Be careful now. People are very touchy, I guess, or sensitive when you say pandemic, right? But it is true in a way. I mean, social media itself, I guess, if you say pandemic, then I guess you are referring to it as a negative thing. And I think maybe to a large extent, it could be negative in the sense that it can take a lot of time, so it can waste a lot of time. True. Also, it could have a negative impact on the kids, especially. I mean, it depends on what they're looking for and what they're after, right? So it can totally shape the mind of a young kid, and maybe it would teach them implicitly or indirectly about the priorities of life. So obviously, when it comes to social media, especially like TikTok and these latest inventions, right? Snapchat, it's all about presentation and appearance. So it's gonna indirectly teach them that what is important in life is the appearance, right? And how they look and how they become famous and successful. So it's gonna give them the wrong idea about all of those things. So that's why we have to, and I would say you cannot totally get rid of it. So let's be very, very practical here and pragmatic. But we have to put some hold or some control on it. We have to be able to control it somewhat. Whether it is in the number of hours you allow and or the kind of content or the kind of apps they're allowed to have. And it all depends also on the age. So I know some parents, for example, who are filtering certain types of content when it comes to YouTube, for example. So there are many, many ideas now. I mean, alhamdulillah, along with this technology that we can say it is negative, we also have some positive technology, like all these ways of, parent control, right? Like Windows came up with that idea some long time ago, where you can monitor or you can control the hours and maybe block either the Wi-Fi or the, the access after certain hours or for certain content. So all of those, should be utilized. But I think it all goes back to, if you remember, which tip was it? Tip number 8, no pain, no gain. So even if they want some time on, let's say, Instagram or, whatever, Facebook, you have to manage it. So first of all, it has to be capped, and it has to be like a reward after a particular accomplishment they make. Now, but we also have to be careful here, because this is not as innocent as, say, a game they play on a particular device. So again, depending on their age, if they're teenagers, it's much harder to control, right? But if you've done a good job when they were younger, then hopefully they have the self-discipline, number one. And number two, they would allow you to also do some filtering and they give you some control, right? For example, and you can do different ways. I mean, I'm not going to tell you I'm not going to tell you what to do, but in some cases, I've seen parents demanding that they have the password. We've done it sometimes, not always successfully, that they have the password of their kids' account. In other cases, if they're not so willing, and I'll say it loud and clear, hack it. If you can hack now you can actually buy certain apps or certain tools where you're able to hack and look at the, whatever the data crumbs or, whatever the finger, whatever they type, basically, you can see that. So, I mean, I'm just giving you different ideas, but I think all of that should be available at your disposal, and you pick what is necessary and what is appropriate for your particular situation. But I think everything should be looked at and considered depending on your situation. But the one thing you don't want is to give them this free reign, right? Because we know that even adults sometimes lose control, and they end up spending hours and hours on Facebook and Twitter and all other types of social media. So it is addictive. I don't want to call it a pandemic, but it is definitely addictive, to say the least.
Jazakallah khair, Sheikh.
Well,
Brothers and sisters, any more questions to Sheikh Anas? I know mostly parents are listening. We may have some kids also, they are listening your lecture as well. So kids, you are also welcome to ask any question if you have.
and while we wait, I think there was a question, it was a private question, so I will not mention the name of the person asking the question, but the question was, what are the best tips for sibling rivalry? There's actually about, two parts. One is about sibling rivalry. So basically brothers and sisters fighting amongst each other. And said fighting, and then he said, sometimes I get tired of this and I have tried all sorts of things. Okay, well, I don't know if I have the perfect answer, but first we have to understand that this is natural. So maybe allowing some of that is healthy, right? I mean, you cannot get rid of it completely. I mean, and this is something, by the way, I notice a lot about Muslim families. So not just, the rivalry you see between siblings, but also somewhat, let's call it the discord or the fighting that can happen between the parents, between the mom and the dad, right? I don't think we should set the expectation too high that we have this utopia in the house. That doesn't exist either. Even from the Prophet ﷺ and from the Sunnah, we learned that sometimes Aisha used to be upset with the Prophet, used to get upset with the Prophet. And there's a hadith that says when she got upset with the Prophet ﷺ, she would say, she would say, like she was making dua, she would say, oh, the Lord of Abraham, instead of saying the Lord of Muhammad, just to show her anger or her, being upset with the Prophet, peace be upon him. Or one time, I think she broke a plate, right? And maybe she was contesting something. So those things are very normal. And what's happened in some Muslim families, because we have this high expectation, we have these idealistic expectations. If something happens now, it's like all hell broke loose. No, this is normal. It's totally fine if people fight. We're humans. We're not angels, right? So it is expected. Now, of course, there are things we can do to minimize the damage from a particular fight. So if you fight, you should not be demeaning to the other, for example, especially if you're adults, because the kids will learn from that, right? Also, when it comes to siblings, like personally, I do allow a bit of teasing that happens between siblings because that is natural, that is normal. But if it turns to be ugly, or if it becomes a bit, hurtful or oppressive or abusive, this is when we have to intervene and stop it. But I think allowing some room for that, it will cut down a lot of the frustration that the parents have. If you're going to become the judge in every single battle, you're not going to have time for anything else, right? And sometimes what I notice also, and maybe this is a good tip for you, it's kind of funny, but I noticed that when the kids are left alone, they're much better together than when you're with them, when the mom or dad are with them. We noticed that many times. It seems like when they're together, they kind of grow up because they realize there's no grown-up around them. So they have to be now the grown-ups, right? And all of a sudden they start acting maturely. Because they realize now that there was no adult around them to say break a fight or something like that. So all of a sudden they start acting maturely. And I noticed that actually a few times. One time, the mother was not around because she had to go overseas because of her mother. She was sick. So I noticed all of a sudden the kids started acting so maturely. So they were like washing the dishes on time. They were taking their turns seriously and washing the dishes. We had the dinner on time, and everybody was acting maturely. So sometimes by you um, obviously you cannot control certain situations. I mean, certain urgencies or emergencies are out of control. But I'm saying sometimes by you withdrawing a little bit and not insisting on being in the middle of everything, sometimes helps the situation, because what you want is you want the kids to feel that they are responsible, to feel that there are some expectations from them, that they're not kids all the time, that they're not treated as kids all the time. So when you allow for that, when you allow them to act like adults, they will act like adults. If you treat them like children, wallahi, I've seen parents treat their 20-year-old or 25-year-old or even 30-year-old, they still treat them like children. So yeah, then they're gonna remain children all their lives. So you have to give them that room to act like adults. And sometimes it's when you take yourself out of it a bit, right? And have some trust in them that they will come through and act in a more responsible way.
Jazakumullah khairan, Sheikh Anas. I think we are running out of time. So inshallah, if you have any more question, you can directly ask to Sheikh Anas offline, or you can come to us, inshallah, ICB board member as well. So with that, Sheikh Anas, please go ahead and lead the dua, inshallah. Again, thank you, and thank you very much for sharing these tips with our community.
Alhamdulillah, Jazakumullah khair. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, ربنا هب لنا من أزواجنا وذرياتنا قرة أعين وجعلنا للمتقين إماما. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant us, righteous children, and to grant us kids and children that are the settlement of our eyes, that we enjoy and we have, a pleasure looking at them. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us and them leaders in piety and righteousness, to make us and them leaders in good deeds. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to save us and to save them from the great trials and tribulations of our time. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to keep them away from all types of fitan, all types of fitna, all types of temptations and distractions, and to give them the maturity and the discipline and the responsibility so that they become productive members of society. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. جزاكم الله خير. Thank you very much for listening. I hope this was somewhat helpful to you, and I hope that you'll be able to utilize and use some of these tips, inshallah, and that you see great humans in your kids, that you're able to, inshallah, really enjoy the fruits of your labor, really, because I know it's a lot of sacrifice. Parenting is all about sacrifice. So I hope that you see the fruits of your labor sooner rather than later. But you gotta have to put some effort initially. So inshallah, this is a great rewarding act in this life and the hereafter.